Okay, so Edward, we've talked about Jesus in history and culture. In culture, we've talked about sources and methods of Christology, and this week we're heading into what you've called the content of Christology. And forgive my ignorance, but is the content of Christology simply Jesus, or is it something more than that?
It's about, yes, it is Jesus, but it's Jesus insofar as we interpret the figure of Jesus. It's Jesus interpreted. It's what Jesus means. So it's about the meaning of Jesus. The content then is the assertions, the claims, the deliverances and proclamations we make about who Jesus is for us, personally, existentially, individually. What does Jesus mean for me? That's part of the content.
Okay.
Right?
So maybe that's why we talked about methods before we talked about content in a way, is because the methods that we use to approach these things actually shape the way we make meaning. So
Right.
It's not as if there's
Right.
some sort of essential content of Christology out there. It's still about meaning making.
It's about meaning making, it's about interpretation, and that's why I'm very interested in this notion of faces. As I posted, I made a post on Saturday. I'm talking about Sibelius, the 3rd century Italian bishop, and how he argued that the meaning of who Christ is really how Christ appears to us and how we interpret who Christ is in terms of those appearances. Okay, so methods are important, methods and sources are important insofar as they provide us the materials and the how of meaning making,
Right.
using the figure of Jesus Christ as the platform, if you will, the basis on which we create meaning, with regard to Jesus.
Yeah. And so now we're moving towards what meanings are we making, and this is part of the content. I've heard you talk a little bit about some 4 aspects of this content of Christology.
Right. So one of the things that I want us and the students to understand, Michael, is that in terms of the content of Christology, there are 4 things I think about. The first I've just mentioned, the existential piece. This idea of how we make Christ meaningful to ourselves. But that's not the end of it.
Right.
Because how we make Christ meaningful to ourselves depends on something else. And that is where we've learned that from, the sources from which we derive the meaning of Jesus for us. And that, for me, is what I call the church. Or when I'm being kind of, pompous,
Yeah.
The ecclesial.
Yeah. Oh, that's a fancy term for church.
Right, the
Ecclesial.
ecclesial significance of Jesus Christ. All that means really is what the church has meant, or how the church has interpreted the meaning of Jesus for itself. And we all belong to some kind of community. Now, I hear a lot of talk about, my personal Christology, my personal theology, and so on. And that's fine, but it's somewhat misleading because everything we have to say about our personal Christology is in some way shaped by some tradition of the community out of which we come.
So in that sense, there's not really an existential reality or existential moment separate from the ecclesial.
No, there isn't.
Yeah.
There is no one has direct, immediate access to who Jesus was.
Yeah.
Our access to who Jesus was is always mediated through church, through community, through tradition, and so on. So that's the second part.
Okay.
The third part for me is, and we've already started talking about this, is what those traditions are, what they mean, how they mediate Jesus to us. So tradition becomes very, very important here in terms of the content of Christology, because the content of Christology is not, something you derive in an immediate kind of way from Jesus. It's you access it through other people, through tradition, through history, and so on. So you have church, you have tradition, and the fourth aspect of it is, to go back to language we've used in the past, is masks, right? We have our own masks through which we approach the figure of Jesus Christ. but the figure of Jesus Christ is already masked in its own original context. Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do you say I am? What do the people say I am? How am I appearing? How am I being interpreted in the community?" So you've got masks to masks. And I'm really interested in how you bring these two ways of thinking, the historical and the contemporary, together.
Okay.
Right.
So the four things, one way to maybe say the four things would be the existential, the ecclesial, or the church, and then something like history or the history of tradition.
Right.
And then the sort of the contemporary.
Then the contemporary piece.
Yeah.
And how do we take the history, the ecclesial bits, and our own personal, existential experiences and make them relevant to our congregations, to the people we interact with on an everyday basis? How do we make them relevant to the spaces within which we operate, whether that's in the corporate world, in the military, or wherever we find ourselves? Okay, so the content of Christology really is about, if I may use this rather awkward term, Michael, it's about operationalizing the meaning of Jesus for me, or making relevant the meaning of Jesus for me in all the spaces in which I move. And over and above that, how, if you really believe that this is good news, that's worth sharing. How do I take that and share it in such a way that it's actually persuasive to people who don't look at the world in the same way that I do? It's persuasive in the sense that if we embrace it, it will contribute to making the world a better place.
Right.
That's what I'm interested in.
Okay. So
is Christology something that allows you to help, to contribute towards making the world a better place?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I hear somebody talk about the content of something, it's typically a descriptive term, or it's a sort of more of an objective term, like, hey, I want to get at the content of it. But I hear you when you say operationalizing, it sounds much more like you're talking about, and your four aspects, a content as practice. Right. This is a making Christology. It's a poesis.
Right. It's a poesis. It's a performance.
Yes.
It's this. What was that band? This is how we do it. Right. This is how we do it.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Right.
So all right.
This is the form of life called Christian, or the form of life informed by Christian discipleship, or a form of life formed by certain beliefs and assertions in the person called Jesus Christ.
Perfect.
Right?
Yep.
Now, and you don't have to be religiously. I'm sorry.
We may have to cut this bit out. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah. So.
Hey, it's still recording. We're good.
Yeah. So you don't have to be overly religious about this. Another way of thinking about content, Michael, is to say, is Jesus Christ Lord and Savior for you? And what does that mean? Is Jesus Christ an ethical figure for you, and nothing more? Okay. You may be Lord and Savior for some, but for others, just a good guy.
Yeah.
Who did incredibly good works. Yeah. Is Jesus Christ for you some kind of prophet? Or is Jesus Christ for you just an ordinary guy who bumbled along, committed certain crimes, and paid for them at the hands of the Romans?
Right. And what work does that do for you?
Exactly.
Right. What work in the world does that do?
Given the historical significance of this person we call Jesus Christ.
Right, because there's the connection between meaning, significance, and relevance you were talking about. Right. It's not just about constructing some sort of meaning so I can articulate that on an exam or something like that, but it's about what is it we hold is as a Christology, and what work does that do?
Absolutely.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.